What is up, everybody? Welcome to Pop Culture Philosophers. I'm your host for today's festivities, Rockin Robbie Billups, and we've got a special guest today. We haven't had him on the show in actually a couple of years. Just recently ran into him down in Orlando, Florida. So happy to welcome back to the stage the one, the only, David Pepose. What is up, my man?
Hey, how you doing, buddy? Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, dude. Anytime, man. Very, very excited about things coming up, man. I remember one of the times that we had you on. You saw that I had like a Captain Planet figure behind me. And I don't remember if it was on air. I think it was after we had like ended the show. And you were like, bruh, that's my thing, dude. Like, I want to do Captain Planet so bad, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh man, I gotta talk to some people. I remember on air, I do a show at Dynamite on Monday nights, right? Like a claim show, right? And Nick popped on air and I was like, hey, Nick, real quick. Do you know who's got the rights to Captain Planet? Because David Pepose has got a really good idea for it. And he's like, well, I don't know. I'm going to have to look into it. I kept pestering him as much as possible. I know you had been pestering him, especially once the announcement came that it's in the pipeline. Because then I like emailed him or something. I was like, dude, David's doing the book, right? He's like, you know, blah, 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 blah. And here we are, dude. It's happening, man.
We made it. We manifested. Yes, For those who aren't familiar with me, I'm David Pepose. I write books like Cable and Savage Avengers and Moon Knight City of the Dead and Punisher over at Marvel and Space Ghost at Dynamite and the upcoming Speed Racer at Mad Cave Studios. But Captain Planet has been my white whale for over a decade. I've always thought that is a character that has all the building blocks to become a blockbuster. And so for years, I've knocked on every publisher's door around the business saying, hey, do you have the rights to Captain Planet? Are you doing a comic based on this? And like you said, San Diego Comic-Con last year, Dynamite announced that they had picked up the publishing rights for Captain Planet. And I saw that press release and I immediately emailed my editor, Joe Rybant and Nick Barucci, and said, is anybody writing this book? Because if not, it's got to be me. And so, yeah, it's been a long time coming, but I'm really excited to finally bring this story to life with my amazing collaborator and artist, Aman Casalos. This is going to be a real fun, epic superhero story for the ages. It's X-Men meets Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I can't wait for fans to get to see Captain Planet reemerge for his long overdue 21st century revival.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned the Avatar Last Airbender thing. I just recently started watching that show. It's like one of my girlfriend's favorite shows of all time. So I had her watch one of my favorite shows of all time, Lost, right? And she just blazed through it and she loved it. She goes, all right, now you got to watch Avatar The Last Airbender. I'm like, that Nickelodeon kids show. Like, come on, dude. I'm so sucked in right now. I'm at the tail end of season 1. I'm sucked in, man.
It's going to get even better from there. It's funny because that I think was the light bulb moment for me. It was probably 10 years ago or so that I watched Avatar for the first time. Or maybe I guess it was a little bit earlier than that, but I remember thinking, oh, you know, the action and inventiveness, the way that they make everything so visually dynamic with the elemental bending, I thought that was so interesting and unique. And I remember thinking, oh, you know, it's too bad that Captain Planet came up before all this, because you could do something really cool and interesting in that vein. And then the next thought was I could do something really cool and interesting in that vein if I ever got my hands on Captain Planet. And so, Avatar is a huge influence of the way that particularly that we're doing the choreography in this book. We're really kind of, I don't necessarily like to think of the Planeteers themselves as superheroes. They are ordinary people. They don't have codenames. They don't have costumes. They've just been given extraordinary power. But I love when I write in the superhero genre, I love being able to like flex the powers and like find different ways and new angles to leverage these things. And so Captain Planet has been a really fun series that we've been able to do some really cool stuff with the action. While I think still remaining true to the original spirit and message of the original cartoon.
Yeah, I loved Captain Planet when I was a kid. I loved the action figures. I loved that all the Planeteers came with rings. You know, like if the figure came with a ring that I could wear, that was even cooler, right? And it was like this whole wave of like environmental cartoons, right? Including one of
Yeah.
my favorites, Toxic Crusaders, which I just
Yeah.
that's great toy lines, great cartoons. That was my bread and butter when I was growing up. So what are you pulling from the original and how are you making this new one different? Because this is a complete reboot, right?
Yes, it is. So similar to my approach on Space Ghost, which was brand new continuity, we're doing the same thing here. You don't have to have watched the original cartoons to get on board with this series. All you got to do is pick up issue 1. We'll lead you through everything you need to know. But at the same time, we are drawing in a lot of the classic characters into this. So the diehard fans will also find a lot to love. Yeah, for me, it's all about accessibility. I think when you're able to kind of start from the ground level, that really opens up these kind of licensed titles for a wider audience. People who might know Captain Planet just through cultural osmosis, they might know the concept, but aren't familiar with the mythology or the world building. We're gonna get you in on the ground level there. Yeah, our series, I see it as it's half superhero movie, half disaster movie. And I think that's something that's so interesting about Captain Planet as a concept. We're going to open up with the invasion of Hope Island by forces unknown who are hunting down Gaia, the high priestess of the Earth. And that's where we're going to meet Captain Planet for the first time, trying to ward off basically an army of mercenaries. And without spoiling too much, Gaia is going to have to resort to a Hail Mary, which is scattering her 5 elemental rings and finding bearers around the world. Sort of almost in the vein of a Green Lantern or the emotional spectrum core. And so, we're going to meet the 5 Planeteers. We're going to see them in their individual contexts all around the world and seeing the way that whether they understand it or not, they all kind of are a part of the ongoing environmental conversation. And watching them come together in New York to try to rescue Gaia once and for all, and summoning Captain Planet for the first time. So it really is kind of like watching this team get to meet and get to like know each other, and watching like the personality clashes, the unexpected bonds, and watching them kind of find their footing as like a team, and some of the setbacks that happen along the way. And of course, Captain Planet himself. He's such a fun character to write. He's sort of the larger than life element for parts of the story, and finding ways to like keep him as a part of the story without hijacking the whole thing and taking the power out of the Planeteers' hands. I'm really happy with how we've kind of circled that square.
Word.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Planeteers themselves, are you updating them? Because, we're in a whole different world now in 2025, right?
It's a great question. And, I think it really speaks to the reason I wanted this book so badly. I talked earlier about Captain Planet has all the building blocks to be a blockbuster. It is inherently multicultural and diverse, and is organic a way that I don't think I've seen since Giant-Sized X-Men. It tackles these very pressing issues of today, not just environmental change, but environmental disaster. I live in Los Angeles. We just had the wildfires. I was in New York during Hurricane Sandy. My parents are in the Midwest. They had record freezing temperatures. It's not a hypothetical like it was in the 80s. This is a disaster movie that we're all extras in. But and then of course, the pop culture is caught up to it. The Avatar element, sort of the X-Men underdog on the run. We're able to really inject that in a way that the original 90s cartoon wasn't able. But to answer your question, things have changed quite a bit since the cartoon originally debuted. And just geopolitically and historically. And so that's something that I've been really excited about, to really kind of take the existing Planeteers and add different twists to them, to really just make them feel modern, to really ground this story in the year 2025. And also, I think to push the envelope, Ted Turner and Barbara Pyle, when they created this series, it was meant to be inclusive. It was meant to kind of invite as many people from as many different walks of life as possible, knowing that no one country, no one person can solve the environmental challenges ahead of us. This this is a team effort. The power is in our hands.
Yeah, and back in the 90s, we were all on board with it. It felt like,
yeah. It's funny, in the 35 years since Captain Planet debuted, now it would be seen as subversive to have something like this come out, particularly broadcast for as wide of a platform as it is. And that's why I think it's important to tell this kind of story. For me, the philosophy I've always had is we can always build a bigger table. We should always be inviting more people to be reading this amazing medium that we all love so much. And for me, it's never been about, I don't want to preach to the converted, or I don't want to preach to the choir, I should say. I want converts. And so for me, we're getting to add new wrinkles to the Planeteers to make them feel more relevant, to really ground them in today. So, for example, we have Kwame, who he's a former soccer star from Ghana until his career is derailed following a leg injury. And so he's going to see some stuff involving the environment in his very first scene. Wheeler is really interesting. He's an auto worker from Detroit. And so he's got a very complicated feeling about all of this because the environmental movement, it has impacted his industry and his livelihood. Albeit he doesn't really necessarily realize it's not the environmentalists that are causing layoffs. It's the bosses. Linka is my favorite. She's really snuck up on me in a really fun way. She's kind of like our Ilyana Rasputin. She's our Wolverine. In the original cartoon, she was from the Soviet Union. She was the most conservative Planeteer. And obviously things in Russia have changed significantly since then. So we've done a full 180 on her. She's actually now the most liberal of the Planeteers. She's got an underground eco-activist band in the vein of Pussy Riot.
Dude, punk rock. That's awesome, man.
She's super fun. She's our team scrapper. Watching her, and she really does play off all the Planeteers in like a really fun kind of way. Guy, we've really leaned into. She's from South Korea. She's a marine biologist, and in the original cartoon, that just meant that she was in a wetsuit and swum around. But I really like the idea of leaning into somebody who loves the science of it all, and somebody who really understands the stakes of what we're dealing with as far as environmental catastrophe. But at the same time, she's the kid sister of the team. She's the beating heart of the squad. And a lot of people underestimate her because of her cheery, sunny demeanor. But you'll see as the series continues, like for her, hope is like a really like revolutionary act. She knows the stakes better than anybody else on the team. And the options are you either keep fighting or you give in to despair. And then finally, we round out the team with Mati, who really has the biggest glow up of the entire roster. Mati, for those who watch the original cartoon, he was often kind of the punchline.
Heart.
Yeah. What is the power of heart? And this is something I've been thinking about for a long time, is that the power of heart is really, it's tactical telepathy. And so Mati, his people were being forced from their land in Brazil to mine for lithium. And so he was about to stage an armed revolution until he gets the power of heart. And it cleanses his mind of all rage and violence and turns him into an avowed pacifist who can absolutely wreck you. He's our Batman. He's our Shang-Chi. He's very much like the X factor of the whole team. And the thing I say about Mati is that he doesn't need to throw a punch because the power of heart has other things. He can summon animals. He can reach into your mind. He can make you see things that aren't there. And so Mati's powers are very versatile and very interesting. And he's going to play like a really crucial role in the series as everything unfolds. And, the way we've tried to kind of round all this out is then, of course, there's Captain Planet and Gaia, the high priestess of the earth. And they're sort of our elevated, more supernatural characters in this sort of more grounded take. And that with minor spoilers, we've sort of seen them. They're a little bit symbiotic, the two of them. Rather than having Gaia be an immortal demigoddess of the earth, which I felt might make our characters a little too powerful. we've turned her into more of a generational figure. It's more of a Dalai Lama kind of figure.
Oh, something like passed down or something like that?
Yeah, that once a generation, there's a new high priest or high priestess of the
Once
earth.
every generation, a Gaia is born.
Yeah, exactly. Who kind of channels the life-giving primordial energies of our world. And I think that really speaks to the original themes of Captain Planet to me. You know, his motto is "The power is yours," and I think that's, for me, the Rosetta Stone of how Captain Planet works is that you can't just summon a genie and expect all your problems to go away. Captain Planet can help when the chips are down, but ultimately it's us. It's those of us here on the street level. It's human beings that are either going to get us out of this or make it worse. And so I thought having kind of that human anchor for Captain Planet in Gaia was really important, and it offered us a lot of ways also to kind of make Gaia almost more of a peer to the Planeteers. And then Cap himself, he's such a fun character, as I'm sure you've seen. Amon Casalos did an amazing redesign of the character.
Yeah, dude, with the beard and the costume and like, yeah, everything going on. Yeah, dude, looks great.
So that was something that I pitched from the very beginning, was that I said 80% of what we need is just a minor redesign on Captain Planet. You know, when he was designed in 1990, the mullets and the crop tops were in. That was the thing, but it was very much a product of its time. So we wanted to really kind of plant our flag and really kind of make some bold design choices in the same way that, you know, Absolute Batman or Ultimate Peter Parker. And I wanted to really reinforce Captain Planet being an elemental, immortal champion of the wilderness. That, you know, he's not made out of flesh and blood like you and me. He's made out of rocks and stone and plants and fire and ice. And making it that his body looks like that. I pitched him as Superman with metamorphosed powers. And cool. Amon really took that ball and ran with it. Particularly, you know, Cap's hair is made out of green fire. He's got the beard, and that was something that came out of left field. You know, he drew us a couple of different design choices, and one of them had the beard, and all of us, every single one of us, went nuts over it. From me to our editor Joe Rybant to everybody at Warner Brothers. You know, it makes sense that like Captain Planet is kind of like the dad figure to these Planeteers, and even though the Planeteers are a little bit older in our run, you know, they're in like, you know, early 20s for this reboot. You know, they have Cap as this mentor, as this reassuring presence. You know, he's not an anti-hero by any means. He's honestly quite the opposite, in that Captain Planet, his whole mandate, his whole mission is that he doesn't want to see anybody die. And, you know, as somebody who was created to defend life at all costs, it's really, he feels like the kind of hero we need in this moment, that feels so cynical and despairing, and that, you know, heroism and values feel like something that's under siege in our world right now. So having a character who doesn't really, you know, he's got that timelessness, that honorability, that just that sense of doing right. So he's been a really fun character to write, and Amon has done such a beautiful job at bringing Cap to life. But yeah, you know, I think it's been really fun kind of redesigning these characters, and also redesigning the villains. I should add, we are introducing.
Yeah, what villains we getting in, man? Because you've been killing it with the villains on Space Ghost, bruh.
Thank you. You know, yeah, the thing I love about Captain Planet is he's got a great bench of villains. And for me, you know, I know Captain Planet, the original cartoon, sometimes got a bad rap for being unsubtle, but I would argue reality has gotten a lot less subtle lately. And I think these villains, for me, I think what was so interesting about them is that for the most part, yes, they had their own kind of unique gimmick, and they were often sort of very larger than life and theatrical in the original cartoon. But the idea of people being fueled by greed and apathy, and ambition. That's very true. That's something that's very human and very much of our current moment. And so, we have Lucian Plunder, who's a ruthless billionaire CEO, as sort of our big villain for this opening storyline. And for me, I thought it was so interesting to have a character who, he is very intelligent. He has a lot of wealth. He has a lot of power, and he masks it in this very utopian kind of talk. But then when you see the action, you realize, like, oh, he doesn't, like, all he cares about is amassing wealth and power. He does not care what the consequences are. He doesn't care who might get hurt in the crossfire. Consequences don't really seem to apply to billionaires in the year 2025. And so through that, we're able to kind of spin out other villains that are related to Plunder. We'll see Dr. Blight, for example, and her AI Maul, which is fun. Duke Nukem will be appearing. I just saw Amon Casales' new design for that character, and it's really cool. Argos Bleak, Plunder's Eric Prince Blackwater style lieutenant, shows up quite a bit in this, and he's a really fun character. And then we have a few others that we're keeping in the back pocket that I can't share just yet in terms of spoilers. Suffice to say, we've got some really cool stuff coming for Captain Planet.
Is there going to be an issue where Captain Planet gets corrupted, starts turning everybody into trees? Is that going to happen?
I had to turn a lot of people into trees to get this assignment. That I never say never. I do, depending on how long we take this series, I do have a sort of idea in the back pocket that is at least vaguely in the ballpark. But yeah, I think, for me, it's been about, and this is why I love doing reboots of these licensed properties, is that on the one hand, it's sort of it's honoring that inner child, who grew up watching these things, or knew of them growing up. But also, I think it's by grounding them and, like, really kind of placing them either in our world or in a world that feels understandable. It's about how do we eliminate that, how do we really facilitate the suspension of disbelief, that, like, if you make this world feel organic and cohesive and feels like something that a reader can really relate to in the current context, I think that what do they say? The more specific you make something, the more universal it feels. And that's kind of how I feel about an approach like this, is that it really does kind of speak to this moment. In certain ways, it feels timelier by the minute. Sometimes I often worry as I write this, what ways is the real world going to get ahead of me? I think, but I do think it's been weird, pitching this book, working on the outline during the last days of the election season, and turning in my outline the week before the election, and getting greenlit the day after the election, and announcing our book the day after the inauguration. You can see
that's spooky almost, man.
It's a little spooky. I hope I haven't, like, created, like, a tulpa or something that that like is manifesting through the script.
It's all your fault. Is that what you're saying?
My fault. All my fault. Sorry, America. I just, I think seeing the response to this has been overwhelming in, like, the best possible way. I do think people are, they want stories like this, and they want to know that, like, they want to know that there's still room for empathy in this world, and that there's still room for people from all walks of life to come together, and that there's still room for ordinary people to make a difference, and to change the world for the better. And it feels like the kind of story that I was built to write. I feel like it's funny, you know, I've written some dark books in the past, and I do enjoy those, but I find that like it does my heart good when I'm writing stories that have some degree of uplift to them.
Yeah.
I feel like Space Ghost. I feel like, you know, I did a 2-part stint on Fantastic Four that really like felt like it was my sweet spot. And I
Yeah,
feel
those
like,
are a great 2 issues, man. I really like them. I'm a big FF head, so I
yeah.
really love that run.
But yeah, Captain Planet is definitely one of those, like I've held on to it for so long and I've believed in the vision for so long, and seeing everybody else immediately clock the vision and get it and really embrace it. Um, that's a special kind of moment in a writer's career. And I think if you're excited just based on like the previews that we've seen, I've read the lettering on issue 1. I really feel good about how all this came together. And I think anybody who wants to give this book a shot, if Space Ghost is my take on Batman, this is my take on the X-Men,
Yeah.
or the Teen Titans. And I think that you're going to find a lot to love about this.
Again, since this idea was percolating for so long, like, did you just kind of like, is it just coming now, or did you go back and rewatch a bunch of old episodes or anything like that to
Yeah,
get prep for it?
I did. I did. Particularly, you know, I watched the, unlike Space Ghost and Speed Racer, where like those came out well before I was of age, and so I rewatched everything to get into those. Captain Planet was so interesting because, similar to my work at Marvel, I grew up with this. Like I watched those episodes. You know, we're not sending the Planeteers to Belfast, for example. You know, I knew those very, very well, but it was interesting to rewatch those episodes as an adult and seeing, like, of course, like seeing, you know, the things that were the product of its time, but also just seeing the raw building blocks and being like, this was ahead of its time. You know, that it's not just environmental disaster that's the problem, but also the human greed that's fueling all of it. Like for something in 1990, that's a pretty bold message. And so I watched a lot of the old episodes, you know, particularly the episodes with Loot and Plunder in the cartoon, Duke Nukem, Dr. Blight was my favorite of the eco villains, as was Verminous Scum. Um, but yeah, the pilot in particular, that one I had actually not seen before, so I watched that while I was kind of putting all this together, and that really kind of helped me triangulate how I was going to do all this, because when you're working on something like Captain Planet, and I felt I had the same challenge with Space Ghost and the same challenge with Cable, is that when you have characters like this, they can be there's a risk of making them all powerful, and then it makes it a lot more difficult to, like, you know, challenge them, but also to make them seem resonant as like human beings. You want to keep these characters on the back foot. And so, you know, for example, like, you know, having a story that's firmly planted in the streets of New York, you know, versus, you know, whisking them all away to Hope Island. You know, like I think making the Planeteers be there with the people, and figuring out also just, you know, the different ways they all make it to New York. I mean, even that I think it speaks to characterization and where they come from, and their socioeconomic backgrounds. And so yeah, I mean, it helps though that the characters themselves, I've known these Planeteers like the back of my hand for so long, and knowing those core personality traits, it gives you it really helps you triangulate. It's sort of, what qualities do you keep, and what qualities are just like they are true to this character, and then where can you kind of make a little twist, and sometimes those twists are act as contrast. You know, having smoldering Mati, like brooding mysterious Mati, was not on anybody's bingo card, but I think that like really like adds a little zip to that character.
Yeah.
Or, you know, or turning Linka's politics into a 180. But at the same time, you know, Kwame, for example, I pitched him as Cyclops meets Sam from Ted Lasso. You know, he's the team leader, and so how do you like do that, and how do you give this team leader, you know, feet of clay, you know, and what are his sort of what are his insecurities and where are his struggles, and how does he sort of learn to be a leader for all of these things. And of course Wheeler being like the team, uh, the team dickhead.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of Flash Thompson from my Savage Avengers run in Wheeler, but also the fact that like he was often the point of view character in that series. He was the one who, um, you know, I'm Jewish, and they always say this at Passover, like the child that doesn't know how to ask questions. That's Wheeler. Is like he doesn't understand why any of this stuff is important, and that's often his arc, is kind of figuring out, like, telling the audience, why does this environmentalist cause matter? And so
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of stuff that we'll be digging into in this book. But yeah, just getting to write these characters, it is an interesting combination, and it's not one that I've felt before. It's sort of like having a reunion with new friends or with old friends while like meeting them all over again.
Yeah.
And so yeah,
Like the
watching.
second part of It, right? From 1990.
Yeah. It's just been really fun kind of watching these team dynamics at play and just kind of throwing the characters at each other and seeing what sparks fly.
Heck yeah, dude. Looking forward to it. I think it drops in April, right? It's in April,
April
right?
23rd, the day after Earth Day.
Oh, how appropriate. That's is it you're the day after so many like crazy moments in history right now.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Let's back up a little bit. How did your relationship with Dynamite start? Because Space Ghost has been amazing. It's been one of their biggest, most critically acclaimed books, I think, ever. It was the first Dynamite book to break my best of the year list. I love it, dude. It's grounded. And I'm like you, Captain Planet, that was our age, right? Space Ghost, I got more into, like, I guess when Cartoon Network first showed up and they would play the old Hanna-Barbera stuff. I know a lot of people know Space Ghost Coast to Coast. So what was your approach with that, and how did it come about?
Yeah, well, thank you, by the way, for the kind words on Space Ghost. And as we're talking, Space Ghost issue 10 will be coming out next week on March 5th, featuring Space Spectre, who I pitched the story as Space Ghost versus Dark Knight Returns Space Ghost. So
that's so that's a great pitch. Dude, you're the best at those, like, just one-line pitches, man.
I'm really happy with that issue. So definitely stop by your comic shop and pick it up. It made my wife cry in a good way. So I think you guys will like it too. Yeah. So it's funny. I've known Nick Barucci at Dynamite for many years, dating back to my earliest days as a comics journalist. Once upon a time, a lifetime ago, after my first job in the industry as an intern at DC Comics during like Final Crisis and Batman R.I.P., I wound up landing at Newsarama, and I wound up working there for many years as a reviewer and as an interviewer. And early on in my career, I wound up briefly on the Dynamite beat, and so I got to know Nick Barucci. And when I made the shift from being a journalist to striking out on my own with writing, there were a number of editors that every time I would come out with a new book, I would reach out and just say, hey, here's my new book. And Nick was one of them. And so, I'd been on Nick's radar for a minute, and it was on the heels of me doing Moon Knight, City of the Dead, and my Punisher miniseries that Dynamite had just locked in their Warner Brothers publishing deal. And they said, we should really see, like, we think David, like, he's proven himself, and we should ask if he's available to tackle Space Ghost. And it was one of those things that when they asked, I took a minute to consider it. And it really occurred to me that I was like, oh, like just in terms of a pure log line, like, you get, like, it's a sci-fi Batman. You get like that, you get the best of both worlds, and that you're able to do like the brooding vigilante, but you're able to throw in really interesting superpowers and the sci-fi world of it all. You're able to tackle a lot of different types of stories. And the more I looked into it, the more I was like, similar to Captain Planet and Speed Racer, I was like, the building blocks are there. There's so many cool things that nobody's really tapped since the original cartoon. The Rogues Gallery, for example, Alex Toth designed so many incredible villains for Space Ghost. And so I was like, oh, there's a lot of opportunity to tell a lot of different stories here. And the thing that really struck me was watching the original episodes was how much of a presence that his sidekicks Jan and Jason Blipp were in the series, and that really kind of crystallized my whole approach on the book. Was that I had read Joe Kelly's run on Space Ghost, his miniseries with Ariel Olivetti, and that was more of a standalone Batman Begins kind of origin story for Space Ghost. I didn't want to retread that ground, but nobody had ever really gone in depth as to like how do Jan and Jace wind up in Space Ghost's orbit, and how does that kind of partnership form. And so that really kind of became the scaffolding for this storyline. And Dynamite was so generous that they offered me 12 issues in an annual to start. I think fans of the book will be, I think, excited for news to come as far as that's concerned.
Yeah.
I think introducing all the villains in sort of like a long Halloween kind of way. It felt like the raw materials nobody they had been barely used, and so it felt like a really great place to kind of plant my flag creatively.
Yeah.
And working with Jonathan Lau on it, he is one of the most talented artists I've ever worked with, and one of the fastest. It really does feel like being chased by a Terminator. He really, like, I can't believe how fast he draws, given how excellently he draws. And he really, this is very much just as much Jonathan's book as it is mine. He's added so much mood and so much action and energy to these pages. But at the end of the day, it really is, it's the story of the ultimate single dad in space, learning on the fly what happens when, your single life gets blown up with 2 kids and a monkey.
Yeah.
Working with Dynamite has been so wonderful. And I want to give a shout out to my editor, Joe Rymant, who he edits Space Ghost and Captain Planet. Dynamite gives me a lot of latitude, and as does Warner Brothers, who are incredible licensors to work with. They let me follow my instincts in a way that, when you are working with licensed properties, you're not always able to do. And so that really, it feels like a win-win. It lets me kind of tell the best possible story that I can. I'm very proud of the response to Space Ghost. And I think that relationship, of course, is what wound up opening the door for Cap.
Yeah. I want to second what you say about Jonathan Lau. The first and only exclusive comic book cover that we ever did as Pop Culture Philosophers, he did for us. And we sent him the idea, and we had that thing back within a day. And I was like, holy cow, man, that's freaking wild, dude.
Yeah, he drew like a whole issue of an upcoming issue of Space Ghost. He drew it in, it was like a little over 2 weeks,
Holy
which
cow.
He wasn't, as far as I know, it wasn't a deadline thing. He just was like, I guess I'm going to draw this thing in like 2 weeks. And I've never worked with an artist who moves at the speed that Jonathan Lau moves and at the quality that Jonathan works at. He is capital C consistent. And so, but he's such a wonderful collaborator, and he really adds so much to this book. I feel like both Jonathan and Amon in particular, the both of them really elevate what I'm bringing to the table here. The choices that they make, Jonathan in particular, he'll throw in a curveball in the pages that isn't necessarily even something that I wrote, but I'm like, oh yeah, that was a better call. That was a better decision. And so,
he's like, David, I'm the artist. Trust me.
He's like, trust me. He's like, or, he just is like, oh, like I got a thing that I think would be cool. And he's always right. It always is cool. And having an artist who is knows his stuff so well and is able to kind of throw in these little twists, it's a gift. It really does add so much for the storytelling. And when I'm doing a lettering pass, like sometimes it's an adventure where I'm like, oh, okay, we added in this thing. Cool. How do it becomes very collaborative. It's very much a back and forth conversation. So yeah, Jonathan is really next level. He is both of us are hard at work on the Space Ghost Annual, which is coming out in June. And then yeah, fans of our run on Space Ghost, stay tuned. I think you will be very happy about what we'll be able to share with you very, very soon.
Yeah, I think they very much will too. And I love that you mentioned the long Halloween kind of influence, and
Yeah,
each issue has a villain. I think that's really cool because they kind of mimics like the original show. Because when I went back and was rewatching them like a few years ago, I didn't remember that they were like so short. They're like
yeah, it was
short
very
little
short.
like one and done stories, but you're
Yep.
kind of doing that while building up the whole narrative about who these people are and what's going on. But you've made all of Space Ghost villains. You're grounding Space Ghost and Jan and Jason all and even the damn monkey, right? But um but then like with the villains, you're truly making them threatening and menacing. But with Zorak, you downright made him a horror movie villain, bruh. He is scary, dude. That was awesome.
Zorak is a very fun villain to write. All the Council of Doom has their strengths to them, but Zorak really did take on a life of his own a little bit, and and I think what I love so much about him is not just his own characterization, which is really fun to write, but I like the way that he really looms over our characters, even when he's not in the room. That Space Ghost, this is the villain, even though he's got long-standing beef with Metalis and that he's been searching for Metalis all this time. Zorak is like the guy that scares him.
Yeah.
Zorak is the one that the moment he breaks out of Omegan prison, he's like, oh no,
He's kind of like a Joker, right? Like I've heard
yeah,
it said like when you don't know where the Joker is or what he's doing, then you should be worried. Same thing with like Doctor
yeah.
Doom, right?
I pitched Zorak as the Charles Manson of space.
Bro.
Where it's just like being in the same room as him, you're like something's not right. He has a sort of like a black hole gravity as far as his personality is concerned. And yeah, but seeing seeing the way that that when he's inevitably defeated, how even that winds up being like a double-edged victory for Jace, poor Jace. And the way that he's got to deal with that, even when Zorak's not in the picture. So yeah, all I'll say is you should definitely check out Space Ghost 10 next week. And then Space Ghost 11, which will actually be coming up the following week.
Oh wow.
So yes, it's in solicits. I can talk about it. Issue 11 kicks off our big Council of Doom 3-parter. So we've spent all this time introducing all the big villains, and now they're going to come together as a sort of a big jam band. And Jonathan has been drawing the absolute hell out of it. It looks really good. So yeah, I'm very excited for fans to kind of see what we've been building towards, particularly RoboCorps and their plans for Blip. We're going to see this unfold and will explode in a big way in the Space Ghost Annual. And also just, kind of seeing, how everything plays out for Space Ghost and the twins. Big plans in store for all that. So this book's been a gift. Honestly, I feel like Space Ghost is the type of book that I've always wanted to write. It feels, people have referred to it as pure superhero comics, and I take that as a huge compliment, because this is what I grew up with, and being able to play with the different genre elements and not shy away from the emotion and the heart of it all. Particularly Space Ghost and his dynamic with Jan and Jace. I want to entertain you. I want to make you cry. I want to give you characters that you can root for and have some emotional payoff to all of this. I feel like Space Ghost is the first book that I've written that, and I'm sure a lot of other creators feel this way as well, but there's always that idea of your reach exceeding your grasp, that you have this idea in your mind, but just and you execute it to sort of the best of your experience and your ability, but you're only as good as you are in any particular moment, and so you always look back at the books, at least I do, And it's a mixture of pride, but you look back and you see like, like I could have done this differently, or, oh, this didn't quite work the way I was envisioning in my head, or, oh, this would have been a better way of doing it. And Space Ghost is the book that like, it really feels like I've narrowed that gap. And I really feel like, okay, like this feels like I'm firing on all cylinders. This really feels like I'm able to tell like the kind of scale of story that I'd like, and seeing the response to it. Seeing people who have no idea anything about Space Ghost, but who gave our book a shot and have become true believers. That really means a lot. That's the sort of trust that writers spend a whole career trying to build. And it's not something I take lightly or for granted. And it's something that I'm always trying to earn. Because these characters are just so fun. And it's such a gift from Dynamite and Warner Brothers, but also the readers and retailers and press who have championed this book and allowed me to continue to write it. That has really meant the world to me. And I think you'll see, particularly as we build up to the crescendo of our first year of stories, you're going to see we're going out swinging.
Heck yeah, man. It sells incredibly well at my shop, bro. It outsells our numbers on many Marvel and DC books, for instance. Like,
all right, I'll take it.
Yeah, it's actually quite the force. You with the combination of Joe Casey on Johnny Quest, like I've never sold more Space Ghost and Johnny Quest comics in my professional retailer career, dude.
So I'm very excited. I know the Johnny Quest team is also doing their Space Quest miniseries that's going to be
and Joe
out.
said that you are kind of hands off, like do whatever, but he found the one villain that you didn't use.
I know. I felt so bad. I came in on that fairly late in the game. So they had done a lot of development, but our editor Joe Rybant has sort of worked in early interface with that book, and so I felt so bad, like being like, "Oh, so sorry, Joe. We really we did really use like all the major villains." But yes, he's.
I took all the Space Ghost villains from you, and now I'm writing your Cable character.
Yeah, I've read the scripts for I think the first 2 or 3 issues of Space Quest, and they're very good. And I've seen the art on issue 1. Sebastian Perez is such a talent. And so, I think that's going to be like a really fun, first off, for anybody who's following Johnny Quest who likes that book, they're going to, I think, really like this new kind of twist on the story. But also, like, for Space Ghost fans, like, it's a fun companion book to like what we're doing. It's its own lane, it's its own unique flavor compared to what we're doing, but like I've read over everything to make sure that like it all still kind of fits in what we're doing, and that none of the books are stepping on each other's toes. So Joe and Sebastian are doing like just really stellar work. And so if you haven't gotten your Space Ghost fix by getting our book, then you should definitely double tap and get Space Quest as well.
Absolutely. You should do that in general. Yeah, you just get it all, man, because both you and Joe and the art teams, everybody involved is just slaying it. Now, we got Speed Racer coming up from Mad Cave. Why don't you talk a little bit about what we can expect from your Speed Racer book?
Sure. Well, we'll be kicking off on Free Comic Book Day, which comes out the week after Captain Planet. So a lot of books from me coming out back to back, which is a wonderful and overwhelming feeling to have. Speed Racer, similar to my approach on Space Ghost. This is brand new continuity, so you don't have to watch the original cartoon to get on board with our book. It's Rocky in a race car. We're going to see how Speed goes from driving in illegal back alley street races to becoming a Formula X champion, and watching him kind of just learn what it's like to be a race car driver. And I'm so excited. I can finally talk about this. We announced it last week at Comics Pro. David Tinto is going to be drawing that book. I worked with him on a chapter for Avengers Unlimited a few years back, and I was so taken with his style. It's very animated and expressive, and it's got that kind of classic like sort of manga injection.
Didn't he work on, what was the book called, like Commanders in Crisis or something like that? Okay, word, yeah.
And he did. He's worked on Ultraman comics over at Marvel, and so he and I have kept in contact. And after I had landed Speed Racer and I was working on my outline for that series, we ran into each other at New York Comic Con, and you know, we caught up. And so when my editor Chaz Pangburn and I were talking about possible candidates to draw the book, David was one of the names that I mentioned. And he really is knocking it out of the park. Our free comic book day issue is, I'm really proud of it. You know, this is my first free comic book day issue. And for
That's
me,
a big deal, dude. That's awesome, man.
it's a huge honor. And for me, you know, the question is, how do you tell a story that still feels satisfying, but that, you know, if for whatever reason, you know, you just pick up issue 1, you don't feel like you're left in the dust. And so I feel like we've really kind of hit that balance in a nice way, with this book and this story in particular. It's going to be told primarily in done ones and done in twos, similar to Space Ghost. And yeah, you know, I was so excited to be invited to write this book. I love car chases. You know, Trad Moore and All Star Ghost Rider, David Aja and Hawkeye. I love seeing, you know, what you can do with car chases in a static medium like comics. And you can see it in a lot of my books, from Spencer and Locke and Spencer and Locke 2. You know, we have car chases in both of those. The OZ has a little bit of that. Scout's Honor has a big car chase in the opening sequence. Even my horror book, The Devil That Wears My Face, has a big carriage chase. So when Chaz Pangburn approached me for Speed Racer, I was like, and offered me such a generous runway. It'll be 16 issues at least, including our free comic book day issue.
Oh, nice.
I was like, oh, you know, 16 issues of car chases, like that rules. Like I don't know when I would ever get that kind of opportunity again. And so I'm really excited with how that is come together. We I believe just sent our free comic book day issue to the printer, and we're about to kind of kick off on the main series. But yeah, you know, I think for me, what's so appealing about Speed Racer as a character and as a concept, it is a sports comic in an industry that isn't always necessarily the kindest to sports comics. But I think having that Speed Racer name and cachet and history, you know, will let us go the distance. And having a publisher that's as supportive as Mad Cave. But I love the idea that, you know, to paraphrase, thank you for smoking, you know, Jordan dunks, Picasso paints, Speed drives. And I love this idea of this is, you know, being behind the wheel of a car is Speed in his element. And no matter what is going on in his world, when he's on the track, this is his place. And watching Speed kind of have this hero's journey, or really this champion's journey, you know, and he's somebody who has the talent and has the drive, but doesn't have the track record. And so watching him kind of like build that up, and watching him kind of build his confidence, and also watching what happens when he gets hit with a setback and how does he get back up, and knowing, I can't spoil it, but the stakes are very personal for Speed. You'll find out by the end of issue 1, but he has to win the Formula X championship. Okay. Otherwise it's going to be like a real problem for everybody. So yeah, I think it's going to be really fun. David drew the absolute hell out of our free comic book day issue, and our colorist Rex Locus from Aquaman is doing a fantastic job. Buddy Bowden, our letterer, I can't speak highly enough of. He did a sensational job with free comic book day. But yeah, it's a different genre than anything I've ever written before. But I think the storytelling methods are very similar to what I'm doing over at Space Ghost. So if you like that book, I think you should definitely check out Speed Racer. But you know, we got a lot of Days of Thunder, a lot of Baby Driver.
Even two great movies. Well, one really good movie and one movie I love, regardless.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I think watching Speed kind of come into his own and get to meet this, you know, not just meeting his own family, you know, Pops Racer and Spritle and Chim Chim, but also, you know, encountering Racer X for the first time, meeting Trixie for the first time, as sort of the Carol Ferris to his Hal Jordan.
Yeah.
You know, the world building is really interesting. There's so many cool characters, and being able to navigate this world through the lens of Formula X racing, which is like racing with a little bit of a twist, a little bit of an X factor, if you will. That'll sort of allow us to incorporate all the classic gadgets from the original Speed Racer cartoon in a way that still keeps the book feeling grounded and organic, but in a way that can find new ways to surprise you.
So it's interesting. So my history with Speed Racer is like, it's weird because I think this book is poised for success for a few reasons. Number one, free comic book day, right?
Sure.
So that's a huge launch, right? And then also Mad Cave's been having some really great success with like licensed properties like Flash Gordon and Dick Tracy. Sure. Those books are slapping right now. People know that Mad Cave is a place to go now to read books, and more so than they ever have. And also Speed Racer, like I knew of Speed Racer just through pop culture osmosis. I knew the theme song before I ever saw an episode. I was at a pizza buffet. That's when I first watched Speed Racer, right? It was just on the TV. And I started watching it here and there when I could catch it on. But then I absolutely adore the Wachowskis' Speed Racer movie. I love that movie. Did you like that movie?
I think it's really great, and I love the idea of a racer being an artist. You know, that has its own degree of self-expression. And I think for me, you know, we just in terms of we don't have the rights to the Speed Racer movie, so we can't draw from that legally. But I really admire that idea of, you know, driving is self-expression. And I think that's something that speaks very much to me as a writer. You know, when this job has its fair share of curves and its fair share of anxieties. But when I'm writing, when I'm in the zone, I'm in the zone. You know, this feels like my element. It feels
when
like
you're behind the wheel, which is your laptop, right?
Yeah. You know, this is sort of, I feel like I'm doing what I was put here to do. And so seeing Speed kind of have that journey of his own is something that really does my heart a lot of good. And so, yeah, you know, it's been a really fun series. I mean, I outline very heavily. So I have this series planned out literally on a page-to-page basis already. So yeah, it's going to be really fun. I can't wait for readers to get to see what we have in store for Speed and Rex and Pops and Trixie and Spritle.
I love that you learned from Scout's Honor, man. Be prepared. Outline to the most minuscule detail.
Yeah, I outlined within an inch of its life. And I think Tatsunoko has been really supportive of all that. And so, yeah, I'm very excited for people to get to see what we have planned for this book.
Yeah, I'm excited to check it out too. Now, you've had success at Marvel, and that's been great to see. Working on some of their biggest properties and characters, creating a new Punisher, work on Moon Knight, Savage Avengers. You got to kind of have Conan's last hurrah at Marvel before it went over to old Jim Zub over there, right? But now you're doing Cable, Love, and Chrome. Cable and Love, dude. And this is this is like that. I love the character of Cable, right? First of all, I am a big fan of Rob Liefeld, right? I just love the ridiculousness of what Rob does in the industry.
Energy, enthusiasm.
Exactly. And then what Joe Casey and Ladron were doing on their extended run. Absolutely great stuff. Igor Cordley had a really great run there when it switched over to Soldier X and all that. Yeah. So I love Cable, and you're telling a Cable story that I love. And I'm into it, man. And it's Cable in Love, dude. How did that come about? How'd you wind up with Cable?
Yeah. So, you know, we can thank my editor, Tom Brevoort, for all of this. I've worked with Tom on most of my projects in Marvel to date, from Savage Avengers to Moon Knight City of the Dead to my Punisher miniseries.
One of it's not the best editors at Marvel ever, right?
Yeah, he really has like these laser guided storytelling instincts, and the fact that he doesn't treat books like statistics, you know, I really admire and respect the hell out of him. So I will work with Tom on just about anything. And so, you know, we were working on our Punisher miniseries, and As we were wrapping that up, we had originally done some very preliminary discussions about like, well, if we did more, what would we do? And that quickly went by the wayside because Tom was enlisted to take over the X-Men office. And so Tom was kind enough to give me a heads up before the news broke everywhere and said, listen, I'm taking over the X office. So Punisher is going to be over at a different office and they will probably have different plans. But do you have any interest in the X-Men line? And of course, I'm a composite being of 90s trash. I love X-Men. And so I said, yeah, of course, like count me in, let me know whatever you got cooking. And so I had just started work on Space Ghost. I think I turned in my second or third issue of Space Ghost when Tom approached me, saying, "Hey, listen, so we're doing this Cable miniseries." And the challenge that he gave me was, I want this to be a time traveling romance story. And so I thought that was so interesting, because it's such a different take than what we're used to. Cable, we often see him as such a stoic figure, or he's a mentor in the context of X-Force. But the idea of this time travel romance, and first off, I've done a lot of romance in my other work. With Savage Avengers, we had the Cloak and Dagger love triangle.
Going to the Chapel, one of my favorites, man.
Moon Knight City of the Dead was very much a two-hander romance. And so that certainly does scratch a storytelling itch of mine. And in a way that we're able to have our cake and eat it too, that we're able to have this big, bombastic, larger than life action sequences, the Rob Liefeld energy, of Cable, but we're able to kind of peel back the layers a little bit and give them a sort of emotional vulnerability that we haven't seen in some time. And so when Tom sort of issued this challenge to me, my response was, well, knowing that this was a miniseries, a 5-issue run, how can we justify a new love interest given that Cable's had long-running love interests in the past? Domino, Esme Cuckoo, the original Jen Scott, even the namesake of Hope Summers, and so the answer, the way that I kind of circled that square was I said, this is a doomed romance. This is something that burns bright because it's going to fade fast. And so I pitched it as my wife had asked me, what's Cable's deal? As I was brainstorming all this, like what makes him unique, what makes him interesting. And as I'm sure as an X-Men head, there are other telepaths and telekinetics in the X-Men. There are other gun guys in the X-Men. There are other time travelers in the X-Men. So what's the thing that Nathan Summers has that nobody else does? And the answer was before Mpox, before the Legacy virus, before our LDS, Cable had struggled with the techno-organic virus. And this was something that he was a time traveler living on borrowed time. And that every day of his life, he knew this could be it. And that was sort of what that's what generated this sort of stoic, larger than life persona that projects strength. Because if you can project strength, maybe you can believe that you can get up in the morning. And so we pitched the book as The Fault in Our Stars meets the techno-organic virus, introducing our new love interest, Avery Ryder, as the first person that Cable has ever met who has the same condition as him. And so it takes that inner conflict that he's always dealing with and externalizes it and forces him to kind of contend with that in a really interesting way. And so, yeah, this book, it's one of the most challenging books I've ever written. I think, the time travel element of it all, and you'll see more and more of that coming, particularly next month in issue 4. And
I remember in Orlando, you were like, man, this time travel stuff, bro.
It's a lot of moving parts that you got to make sure you have straight. But the emotional texture is unlike anything I've ever written, and it sometimes can kind of take you to hard places. The idea of Cable to me is somebody who represents someone, people with real life chronic, sometimes terminal conditions, cancer, ALS, Parkinson's, leukemia, even just chronic conditions like Crohn's, people who just you know, there's no cure. It's just living, you know, and how do you make a life worth living when you have something like that? And I think that's something that's difficult for a lot of us who aren't dealing with that. You know, that's something that we take tomorrow for granted. But when tomorrow isn't guaranteed, how do you live your life? You know, how do you find something worth living for? You know, if you're surviving just to survive and you don't have anything worth living for, hasn't the virus already won? And so, you know, in between that, you know, the flip side of it, the ethics of dying with dignity. You know, do you die in a hospital bed? Do you die with your boots on? You know, there's no right or wrong answer to all that, but these are all very challenging, kind of painful concepts to contend with. And for someone like Cable, who has never really had someone who understands his condition, somebody who he can really act as a sounding board with, that's been like a really interesting kind of thread for this comic. And so I've been so thrilled with the response to Cable. You know, when you do something that's so against the grain, like a love story starring Cable, you never really know how it's going to be received. But seeing the way that people understood this theme of Cable as sort of he's the X-Man with the living with a chronic condition, seeing people understand that and seeing people really rooting for his relationship with Avery. Yeah, we're gonna hopefully make you cheer. We're also gonna break your heart a little bit. It's an emotional series, to say the least, and I can't wait for people to see how we wrap this one up.
Heck yeah, I can't wait for it either, man, because I've been loving it, and I love that take on Cable. How do you live when there's no tomorrow, especially when you're the man from tomorrow? Not Superman, the man of tomorrow, but, you know, the man from tomorrow. I mean, that's a
Exactly.
really cool idea, right?
Yeah.
So I love that you're having success at Marvel. I love that you're doing licensed properties like Speed Racer, Space Ghost, and now Captain Planet. I'm glad that's happening.
Yeah.
But we all know what I love and get off on the most in comics is creator-owned stuff.
Yes.
Like people doing their own thing. Spencer and Locke, freaking amazing. Going to the Chapel, Scout's Honor, The Devil That Wears My Face. Bruh, what a bonkers book, dude. And the art, I mean, you couldn't found a better artist, right?
Yes, Alex Cormack is a genius.
He's great. I got to hang out and have beers with him at Heroes Con a couple of years ago, dude. That guy's a hoot. Him and
Yes,
John Lees were there, man. We just had so much fun,
they're
dude.
great. They're both great.
And so I already know the answer to this, but I'm going to act like I don't for the benefit of everybody else. But we're going to get the OZ issue 3 at some point, right?
Yes, we are. Ruben Rojas is actually drawing the final page right now. So
as we speak, he's watching the stream and drawing.
as we speak, he is working on a gnarly double page spread, and that's then we are wrapped on inks for the series. So yes, we are going to be doing a third Kickstarter for that in 2025. I'm still locking down the specific window. I want to make sure that nothing I do nothing cannibalizes each other. And my schedule has become complicated in the best of ways, with various releases coming out this year. But yes, this book is going to happen. I'm so thrilled. I think Ruben has done amazing work on it, and I think you're going to see that this big finale is definitely going to be worth the wait.
Well, I love the OZ, and that's cool. And is there any more creator-owned stuff? I'm sure in the future, right? You always got to keep something going for yourself, right?
Yes, I do have another creator-owned project that I think we'll be discussing in a few weeks. So it's a totally different genre than anything I've ever written. But I was able to talk with retailers at Comics Pro a little bit about it last week. And the response was even more than I could have even hoped for. It is by far the strongest response I've ever gotten to a creator-owned project from a retailer. So seeing it happen live in person was wonderful. I've referred to it in the past as Project Sweet Potato. So that book has been in the works for a long time. It's very personal to me. And you will get to see what that book is. I believe they're going to be announcing it in March. So stay tuned. All I'll say is, of all the books I've written, this is the missing food group.
Okay.
So I'm excited for you guys to get to see it.
Well, I'm excited for you and your career. I love to see it grow and blossom. And David, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule, because you got a lot going on. And I know you've been all over the place promoting your books and all that kind of stuff. So
Well,
thank you so much, bro. Of course, man. And thank you. Just so everybody knows, when David saw me standing outside of MegaCon, he's like, "Give me a hug, man." He gave me a big, giant hug. And then you were gracious enough to take a look at the project that me and my buddy Kevin are working on. You gave us some really good pointers, and I really appreciate that, and taking the time to talk to us about that, man. You were very encouraging, and you gave us one of those signature David Pepose pitches to use, and I really appreciate that too, man, because I was like, I never thought of the book that way, but he's right. It is a little Judge Dredd.
Use that with my compliments. No, I listen. I'm grateful to you for having me on the show, and for all the support you've given my work, and for everyone watching. Thank you so much. Really, this a business like comics, it really does take a village, and for all the readers and retailers and press that have just come together to champion my work. I wouldn't be able to do my dream job if it wasn't for your support. So thank you all. Please tell your local comic shop you want Space Ghost, you want Captain Planet, you want Cable 11 Chrome, you want Speed Racer. I know it's a lot of books, but I'm working really hard to entertain you, and my puppy eats a lot of kibble. So definitely tell your local comic shop you want to read my stuff. Every pre-order counts. Every pre-order is a huge help. So, and thank you all for watching.
Yeah, absolutely. David, thank you so much. You out there watching, thank you so much. Just like David said, we're dipping out. So remember, read comics. What was I going to say? Read comics, station, pop, pop, boom. And if you ain't down with PCPX, Captain Planet, 2 words, Captain Planet, in April from Dynamite and Space Ghost. And that's more than 2 words, but that's all we need. Anyway,